"Boss, you can't get in that car." Ricardo's voice cut through the cold air of the underground parking garage like a blade. Dr. Michael Harrison, CEO of Harrison Global Industries and one of the most influential businessmen in the country, stopped with his hand on the door handle of his armored Mercedes, looking at his new driver with that mixture of surprise and irritation that powerful men reserve for those who dare contradict them. The company's two security guards, Davis and Thompson, immediately exchanged glances with expressions ranging from contempt to amusement. "Excuse me." Dr. Harrison's voice dripped with authority. "You've worked here for exactly 3 weeks, Ricardo. Want to explain why you're giving me orders?" Ricardo Silva was 34 years old and never imagined he'd be in this position. 8 months ago, he'd walked out of state penitentiary after serving 6 years for a crime he didn't commit, a drug trafficking charge fabricated by corrupt cops who needed a scapegoat. Getting this chauffeur job through the social reintegration program had been a miracle. Losing it would mean returning to the hell of the streets, where ex-convicts were treated like disposable trash by society. But right now, looking at the car and then at the two security guards watching him with malicious smiles, Ricardo knew he had an impossible choice: his job or his employer's life. "Sir, trust me. Please." Ricardo's voice was firm, but his eyes carried an urgency that made Dr. Harrison hesitate. Davis stepped forward, his hand instinctively moving to his holster. "Dr. Harrison, this guy's crazy. Just got out of prison, and he's already having episodes. Probably drug withdrawal." The mention of prison made Ricardo clench his fists, but he kept his eyes fixed on his boss. In those 10 seconds, his mind went back to 15 minutes earlier, when he'd arrived early to pick up Dr. Harrison from an important meeting. Davis and Thompson were talking near the car, not noticing his presence in the garage's shadows. "The package is ready, man. When the suit gets in, just trigger it," Thompson had said, using the characteristic slang Ricardo knew all too well, the coded language prisoners used to discuss crimes without being understood by guards. Package meant bomb or explosive device. Trigger meant detonate. "The crew will grab the body after." "Boss said clean the whole job," Davis had responded, and Ricardo felt his blood freeze. Crew meant accomplices. Boss wasn't Dr. Harrison, it was whoever had hired the guards for the murder. Ricardo had frozen in that moment, his heart racing. These two weren't just corrupt security guards, they were infiltrated criminals, and Dr. Harrison was minutes away from being murdered by his own security team. Now, back in the present, Thompson laughed sarcastically. "Dr. Harrison, you're wasting time listening to a con. The meeting with the Japanese investors starts in 20 minutes. We're gonna be late." Dr. Harrison studied Ricardo for a long moment. There was something in this young man's eyes. It wasn't madness or paranoia. It was the unshakable certainty of someone who knew evil when he saw it, because he'd swum in those dark waters for far too long. "Explain. Now." Dr. Harrison's voice was low but carried the weight of someone who'd built an empire making quick decisions and trusting his instincts. "Sir, 15 minutes ago, I heard these two talking." Ricardo kept his voice steady, even feeling Davis's murderous stare burning his neck. "They used prison language. Specific. The kind only someone who spent years inside knows." Davis took a threatening step forward. "This son of a bitch is lying." "They talked about a package being ready," Ricardo continued, ignoring the threat. "About triggering it when you got in. About the crew picking up after." Dr. Harrison's face paled slightly. He didn't fully understand the slang, but Ricardo's tone and the sudden change in his two guards' body language told a story even a businessman could read. Thompson forced a nervous laugh. "Dr. Harrison, this is ridiculous. We were talking about a delivery package that—" "Both of you, step away from the car. Now." Dr. Harrison's voice brooked no argument. For a split second, Ricardo saw Davis's mask fall completely. His eyes revealed something cold and calculating, the look of a predator whose plan had just been exposed. His hand started moving toward his holster again, but Ricardo was already in motion. Years of survival in prison, where slow reflexes meant death, had sharpened his instincts to razor edges. Ricardo threw himself in front of Dr. Harrison, pushing him back hard enough to make him stumble and fall away from the car. "Run!" Ricardo shouted, but his words were swallowed by a deafening explosion. The armored Mercedes exploded in a fireball that illuminated the entire underground garage like an artificial sun. The shockwave threw Ricardo against the concrete wall, and for a moment, everything went black. When his ears stopped ringing and his vision returned, Ricardo saw Davis and Thompson running toward the emergency exit. Dr. Harrison was lying a few meters away, dazed but alive. Black, toxic smoke began filling the garage. Ricardo forced his battered body to stand. His driver's shirt was torn, and he felt warm blood trickling from a cut on his forehead. But he was alive. And more importantly, he'd saved the life of a man who, against all odds, had given him a second chance when no one else would. As he helped Dr. Harrison up and guided him away from the burning wreckage, Ricardo had no idea that those 15 seconds of decision had just changed his life in ways he could never imagine. There, among the smoking debris and the acrid smell of burning metal, a story began that would expose a conspiracy far bigger than a simple murder attempt. Because the real question wasn't who had tried to kill Dr. Michael Harrison, it was why an ex-convict, who had every reason to let the rich man die and disappear into the night, had risked everything to save him. And more importantly, what did this ex-convict know about the criminal underworld that even the city's most powerful man couldn't see? As sirens began echoing in the distance, Ricardo looked at Dr. Harrison and noticed something in the businessman's eyes he hadn't seen in a long time: genuine respect from someone whose entire worldview had just been completely shattered. If you're enjoying this story of justice and second chances, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. The police arrived within minutes, but their questions weren't what Ricardo expected. Detective Carson, a man with gray temples and eyes that had seen too many lies, sat across from him in the sterile interrogation room, studying him like a specimen under glass. "So let me get this straight," Carson said, tapping his pen against the metal table. "You've been out of prison for 8 months, and now your boss's car mysteriously explodes after you conveniently warn him not to get in." Ricardo felt the familiar weight settling on his chest, the suffocating sensation of being guilty until proven innocent, simply because he'd worn an orange jumpsuit once. "I saved his life. Or you set up the bomb yourself and got cold feet." Carson leaned back, crossing his arms. "Maybe thought you'd play hero, get a nice reward. We've seen it before with you people." You people. 2 words that carried the weight of every door slammed in Ricardo's face, every job application rejected, every person who crossed the street when they saw him coming. 6 years of being dehumanized in prison, and society was determined to continue the sentence indefinitely. "Detective, that's enough." Dr. Harrison's voice cut through the room like a judge's gavel. He stood in the doorway, his lawyer beside him, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia Chun who looked like she ate hostile police departments for breakfast. "My employee saved my life. The security footage will confirm his story." Carson's jaw tightened. "Mr. Harrison, with all due respect, this man is a convicted." "This man," Dr. Harrison interrupted, his voice dangerously quiet, "prevented my murder while 2 employees I trusted were planning to kill me. Unless you have evidence suggesting otherwise, this interview is over." Ricardo watched this exchange in stunned silence. In 6 years behind bars and 8 months on the outside, no one had ever defended him like that. His throat tightened with an emotion he couldn't quite name. The security footage told the story Carson didn't want to hear. Davis and Thompson, caught on camera fleeing the scene seconds before the explosion. Ricardo's desperate push that saved Dr. Harrison's life. By the time they left the police station 3 hours later, warrants had been issued for the 2 guards' arrests. But as they walked to Dr. Harrison's temporary car, a rental, since his Mercedes was now twisted metal, Ricardo's instinct screamed danger. Years of survival in a place where complacency meant death had taught him to trust that inner voice. "We need to talk," Dr. Harrison said once they were moving. "About how you knew what Davis and Thompson were planning." Ricardo had been dreading this conversation. He stared out the window at the city lights blurring past, remembering the night that had stolen 6 years of his life. He'd been 28, working 2 jobs to support his younger sister through nursing school after their parents died. Walking home through the wrong neighborhood at the wrong time. 3 cops, a planted bag of drugs, and a public defender who barely looked at his case. The judge took one look at Ricardo's zip code and skin color and decided guilt was obvious. Prison had been hell's waiting room. The first week, an older inmate named Marcus had pulled him aside. "Kid, you got 2 choices in here. Learn the language and the rules, or become prey." Marcus had taught him everything: the codes, the hierarchies, the unwritten laws that kept you alive. How to read people's intentions from their stance, their words, their silence. How certain phrases meant specific crimes. How a conversation about packages and triggers wasn't about deliveries, but about death. I spent 6 years in Riverside State Penitentiary, Ricardo finally said, his voice quiet. For a crime I didn't commit. Planted evidence. Corrupt cops needing to close a case. Inside, you learn the language fast or you don't survive. Davis and Thompson used prison code, specific terminology that only comes from being inside or working with people who are. Dr. Harrison was silent for a long moment. 6 years for something you didn't do. The system doesn't care about truth when you're poor and look like someone they've already decided is guilty. Ricardo's hands clenched in his lap. I lost everything. My sister had to drop out of nursing school. My fiancé left. My friends disappeared. When I finally got out on appeal after new evidence surfaced, I was nobody. Just another ex-con nobody would hire. Except me. Except you. Ricardo turned to look at his boss. Your reintegration program was the only place that even called me back. Everyone else saw my record and threw my application in the trash. Dr. Harrison's expression was unreadable. And today you risked that job, risked everything, to save my life. I couldn't let an innocent man die. Ricardo's voice cracked slightly. Not when I had the power to stop it. 6 years taught me what it feels like to be powerless. I'm never choosing that again. The car stopped at a red light, and in that moment of stillness, Dr. Harrison's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, and Ricardo saw his face drain of color. What is it? Dr. Harrison turned the phone so Ricardo could see. It was a text from an unknown number, but the message was crystal clear. The suit survived. The driver talks. Your sister doesn't. Make the smart choice. Ricardo's blood turned to ice. They're threatening my sister. They're threatening both of us. Dr. Harrison's voice was tight. Which means this wasn't just about killing me. They want something, and they're willing to murder anyone who gets in their way. His phone buzzed again. Another message, this time with a photo. Dr. Harrison's teenage daughter, Emily, leaving her private school, completely unaware of the man watching her from across the street. Ricardo saw something change in Dr. Harrison's eyes, the transformation from civilized businessman to something primal and dangerous. It was the same look he'd seen in the eyes of fathers in prison, men who would kill without hesitation to protect their children. We need to go to the police, Ricardo said, but even as the words left his mouth, he knew how hollow they sounded. The police. Dr. Harrison's laugh was bitter. Ricardo, Davis, and Thompson were hired through the city's elite security firm. They had clearances, background checks, references. Someone with serious power put them in position to kill me. Going to the police might be signing our family's death warrants. The light turned green, but neither of them noticed for several seconds. When Dr. Harrison finally pressed the accelerator, his hands were shaking slightly on the wheel. There's something else, he said quietly. Something I haven't told the police yet. Ricardo waited, sensing this revelation would change everything. 2 weeks ago, I fired 3 executives for embezzlement. They were stealing millions, funneling it through offshore accounts. I thought it was over when they left, but now... Dr. Harrison's jaw tightened. What if this wasn't random? What if Davis and Thompson were hired by someone inside my own company? The implications hit Ricardo like a physical blow. This wasn't just an assassination attempt, it was the opening move in something much larger. And now, by saving Dr. Harrison's life, he'd painted a target on his own back and on his sister's. His phone rang, shattering the tense silence. Unknown number. Ricardo's hand trembled as he answered. Ricardo Silva. The voice was electronically distorted, but the menace was crystal clear. You made a mistake today. People who make mistakes around us don't get second chances. Your sister Angela works the night shift at Mercy Hospital, doesn't she? Walks to her car alone through that dark parking garage. Ricardo's vision blurred red. You touch her and I. You'll what? You're nobody. An ex-con who got lucky today. Stay lucky. Keep your mouth shut, convince your boss to do the same, and maybe, your sister celebrates her next birthday. The line went dead. Dr. Harrison glanced at him, reading the rage and terror warring on Ricardo's face. They called you too. Ricardo nodded, unable to speak past the fury choking him. His sister, Sweet Angela, who'd cried when he was sentenced, who'd visited him every month for 6 years, who'd never stopped believing in his innocence, was now in danger because he'd done the right thing. But beneath the fear, something else was growing. Something cold and calculating that prison had planted in him like a seed, watered by 6 years of injustice. He'd spent those years learning not just the language of criminals, but how they thought, how they operated, how they could be beaten. "They made a mistake," Ricardo said quietly, his voice carrying a weight that made Dr. Harrison look at him sharply. "They think I'm just some ex-con they can intimidate. They don't know what 6 years inside actually taught me." "What did it teach you?" Ricardo turned to meet his boss's eyes, and Dr. Harrison saw something there that made him realize his driver was far more than he appeared, not just a victim of circumstance, but a survivor who'd learned to navigate the darkest corners of human nature. That sometimes, the only way to beat monsters is to know how they hunt. Dr. Harrison drove them to a location Ricardo didn't expect, a modest apartment building in the industrial district, far from the glass towers and gated communities where men like Harrison typically spent their time. They took an elevator to the 3rd floor, where Dr. Harrison knocked on a door marked 3F. The woman who answered was nothing like Ricardo imagined. Dr. Sarah Chun was in her mid-40s, wearing jeans and a faded university sweatshirt, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. But her eyes held the sharp intelligence of someone who missed nothing. "Michael, you look like hell," she said, stepping aside to let them in. "And I'm guessing this isn't a social call." "Sarah, this is Ricardo Silva." "Ricardo, meet Dr. Sarah Chun, former FBI cybercrime specialist, current thorn in the side of every corrupt corporation in this city." Sarah studied Ricardo with an intensity that made him feel like she was reading his entire criminal record from his posture alone. "The chauffeur who saved your life. I saw the news." She turned to Dr. Harrison. "You think this connects to the embezzlement case?" "I know it does." Dr. Harrison pulled out his phone, showing her the threatening messages. "They went after our families within hours. This is too coordinated, too fast. Someone's been planning this for months." Sarah's expression darkened as she read the messages. "Sit down. Both of you. We need to talk about what you're actually up against." Over the next hour, Sarah laid out a picture that made Ricardo's blood run cold. The 3 executives Dr. Harrison had fired, Robert Crane, Jennifer Walsh, and David Park, weren't just embezzlers. They'd been systematically positioning themselves to take over Harrison Global Industries, creating paper trails that would make Dr. Harrison look guilty of the very crimes they were committing. "The bomb was Plan A," Sarah explained, pulling up documents on her laptop. "Kill you, blame it on business rivals or random violence, and in the chaos of your death, these 3 take control of the company. Your daughter inherits, but she's 17, too young to manage a billion-dollar empire. Who do you think the board would appoint as interim management?" "Crane, Walsh, and Park," Dr. Harrison said, his voice hollow. "They've been setting this up from the inside. For at least 2 years." Sarah pulled up more files. "Look at this: shell companies, offshore accounts, falsified contracts. They've been bleeding your company dry while setting you up to take the fall. The moment you fired them, they activated their backup plan. If they can't take the company legally, they'll destroy you and take it in the aftermath." Ricardo felt the pieces clicking together with sickening clarity. Davis and Thompson weren't just hired killers. They were planted months ago, weren't they? Waiting for the order. Sarah nodded, a hint of respect in her eyes. "You catch on fast." "Yes, they've been in position for 4 months. Long enough to learn routines, gain trust, find vulnerabilities. The bomb in the car was sophisticated, military grade. These people have serious resources. Resources funded by stolen money from my own company." Dr. Harrison's hands clenched into fists. "How much did they take?" "Conservatively, $43 million over 2 years." Sarah pulled up a spreadsheet that made Ricardo's head spin with numbers. "But here's the beautiful part. The trail they left makes it look like you authorized every transaction. If they destroy you and this goes to court, your own financial records condemn you." The apartment fell silent except for the hum of Sarah's computers. Ricardo watched Dr. Harrison process this betrayal. People he trusted, promoted, treated like family, had been systematically destroying him while smiling to his face. "There has to be a way to prove what they did," Ricardo said quietly. "Some mistake they made." Sarah looked at him with something almost like a smile. Now you're thinking like a hunter. Yes, they made mistakes. Criminals always do, no matter how smart they think they are. But here's the problem. Gathering evidence without them knowing will take time. And time is something you don't have. Dr. Harrison's phone buzzed. Another message, this time with a video attachment. He pressed play, and Ricardo watched in horror as the footage showed his sister Angela leaving the hospital, walking to her car, completely unaware of the camera following her every move. The message beneath was simple, tick-tock. Ricardo's vision went red. I need to get to her. Now. Wait. Sarah's voice cut through his panic. That's what they want. You rush to protect her, you expose yourself, they kill you both. Or worse, they grab you, use you as leverage against Michael. Think, Ricardo. You survived 6 years in prison, you know better than to play the enemy's game. She was right, and he hated it. Every instinct screamed to run to Angela, to protect the only family he had left. But Sarah was correct, rushing into an obvious trap would only get them both killed. Then what do we do? His voice shook with suppressed fury. Sarah exchanged a glance with Dr. Harrison, and something passed between them, the unspoken communication of people who'd worked together before. Michael, you sure about this? After what happened today? Absolutely. Sarah turned to Ricardo. How much do you remember about prison hierarchy? The real structure, not what the guards see. The question caught him off guard. Everything. You don't forget that. Why? Because Robert Crane has a secret that would ruin him if it got out. Sarah pulled up a new file, this one marked with red confidential stamps. Before he became a respected executive, he did time in the same prison you were in, Riverside State. Different name, different identity, expunged record that cost someone a fortune to bury. He's been living a lie for 15 years. Ricardo felt electricity run through his veins. When was he there? 2008 to 2012. Aggravated assault, racketeering. Got out early on a technicality. Ricardo's mind raced back through his memories. He'd arrived at Riverside in 2017, but prison had its own oral history. Stories passed down, names remembered, debts that never expired. And one particular story surfaced, about a man named Bobby Cross who betrayed his crew to cut a deal with the DA. Bobby Cross, Ricardo said slowly, watching Sarah's eyes widen. That's Crane's old name, isn't it? How did you? Because Bobby Cross is a legend in Riverside. And not the good kind. He ratted out 12 members of the Santos cartel to save his own skin. Those men got life sentences because of his testimony. Ricardo leaned forward. The Santos cartel doesn't forget. Ever. If they knew Bobby Cross was alive and well, calling himself Robert Crane, living in a mansion. Dr. Harrison's expression shifted from grief to something calculating. They'd kill him. Slowly. Ricardo's voice was cold. Prison justice is brutal, but cartel justice is an art form. If word gets out where Bobby Cross is, Crane won't survive the week. Sarah was already typing. This could work. We leak his real identity to the right people, let the cartel handle him. But we need to be careful, the cartel won't distinguish between Crane and anyone near him. Michael, if we do this, your company becomes a war zone. My company is already a war zone. Dr. Harrison's voice was steel. These people tried to kill me, threatened my daughter, and are hunting Ricardo's sister. I'm done playing defense. Ricardo felt a strange sensation, something he hadn't experienced in years. Hope mixed with purpose, the feeling of finally having power instead of being powerless. But beneath it lurked a question that wouldn't let go. Why are you helping me? He asked Dr. Harrison suddenly. You could have fired me, distanced yourself, protected your family alone. Why bring me deeper into this? Dr. Harrison met his eyes, and for the first time, Ricardo saw past the billionaire facade to the man underneath, someone who understood what it meant to be betrayed by people you trusted. Because you had every reason to let me die today and save yourself. You were an ex-con driving a rich man's car, no one would have questioned it if you just walked away. But you didn't. You risked everything for a stranger who'd only given you a job. Dr. Harrison's voice grew quiet. That kind of integrity is rarer than any fortune I've built. I'm not letting them destroy you for having it. The moment hung in the air, heavy with unspoken understanding. Ricardo felt his throat tighten with emotion he couldn't quite name. Gratitude, yes, but also something deeper. Recognition from someone who mattered, validation that he was more than his past. Sarah cleared her throat, breaking the tension. Touching. But we have a problem. Even if we take down Crane, Walsh and Park are still out there. And whoever they're working with, because let's be real, 3 executives didn't plan a military-grade assassination alone, is still unknown. Then we find out who. Dr. Harrison pulled out his phone. Patricia is already digging into their communications. If there's a puppet master pulling strings, we'll. His phone rang, interrupting him. The caller ID showed Patricia Chen. Michael, we have a situation. Patricia's voice was tight with urgency. I just got word from my contact in the DA's office. They're planning to arrest Ricardo tomorrow morning. Ricardo's blood froze. For what? Conspiracy to commit murder. They're claiming you and Davis and Thompson worked together, that you got cold feet and warned Michael to look like a hero. Detective Carson is pushing it hard. He's building a case that you're the mastermind. The room spun. Ricardo had spent 6 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit, and now they were trying to send him back for saving a man's life. Sarah was already pulling up her computer. We can fight this. The security footage shows an ex-con who conveniently overheard a conversation and saved his wealthy boss. Patricia's voice was grim. Carson spinning it as a setup from the beginning. With your record, Ricardo, a jury will want to believe you're guilty. It's easier than admitting the system failed you twice. Dr. Harrison's face had gone pale. I'll testify. I'll tell them exactly what happened. And Crane's team will call you an unreliable witness, emotionally compromised. They've already started leaking stories to the media about how you have a history of being too trusting, how your company's been bleeding money from poor judgment. They're destroying your credibility before you can even speak. Ricardo felt the walls closing in. In less than 24 hours, he'd gone from invisible ex-con to the center of a conspiracy that could send him back to prison for life. The irony was suffocating. He'd saved a life and might spend the rest of his own behind bars for it. But then something shifted in his mind. 6 years in Riverside had taught him that the system was rigged against people like him. That playing by the rules when your enemies controlled the game was suicide. That sometimes, the only way to survive was to become what they feared you already were. No, he said quietly, his voice carrying a certainty that made both Dr. Harrison and Sarah look at him sharply. I'm not running. I'm not hiding. And I'm sure as hell not going back to prison for saving someone's life. Ricardo, Dr. Harrison started. They think I'm just an ex-con. Someone they can frame, intimidate, destroy. They have no idea what 6 years inside actually prepared me for. Ricardo stood, his mind already working through possibilities. They want to play dirty? Fine. But they're about to learn that the man who survives 6 years in Riverside State isn't someone you underestimate twice. Sarah watched him with something like admiration. You have a plan. The beginning of one. Ricardo turned to Dr. Harrison. You said you trust me. Do you still? Dr. Harrison didn't hesitate. With my life. Literally. Then here's what we're going to do. Ricardo's plan was elegantly simple, which made it devastatingly effective. Within 18 hours, 3 things happened simultaneously that turned Robert Crane's world into ash. First, an anonymous package arrived at the Santos cartel's primary distribution hub, a nondescript warehouse that law enforcement had been watching for years without enough evidence to raid. Inside the package was a file containing Robert Crane's real identity as Bobby Cross, complete with his current address, daily routine, and detailed photos. Also included were copies of his original testimony that had sent 12 cartel members to life sentences. The cartel's response was immediate and brutal. Within 3 hours, Crane's mansion was under surveillance by men who didn't bother hiding their presence. They wanted him to know. They wanted him to feel the terror building. Second, Sarah Chen executed what she called a digital apocalypse. Every financial transaction Crane, Walsh, and Park had made over 2 years, every fraudulent transfer, every falsified document, every stolen dollar, was simultaneously uploaded to the FBI's Financial Crimes Database, the SEC's investigation portal, and leaked to 3 major news organizations. But the masterpiece was the recordings. Ricardo had remembered something crucial from his prison days. Criminals who thought they were safe got sloppy. Sarah had hacked into the security firm's internal communications and discovered that Davis and Thompson had been documenting everything, keeping insurance in case their employers tried to eliminate them. Recordings of meetings where Crane, Walsh, and Park discussed the assassination plan in explicit detail. Text messages coordinating the bomb. Financial transfers paying for the hit. The evidence was ironclad, time-stamped, and utterly damning. Third, and perhaps most satisfying, was the press conference. Dr. Harrison stood before a room full of journalists, Ricardo beside him, and told the truth. Not the sanitized corporate version, but the raw, ugly reality of what had happened. He showed the threatening messages, played portions of the recordings, displayed the financial crimes in charts that even lay people could understand. "My former executives attempted to murder me yesterday," Dr. Harrison said, his voice steady and clear. "They would have succeeded if not for this man, Ricardo Silva, who risked everything to save my life despite having every reason to let me die. He's an ex-convict, yes. Wrongfully imprisoned for 6 years for a crime he didn't commit. And yesterday, he proved that integrity has nothing to do with where you've been and everything to do with who you choose to be." The room erupted with questions, but Dr. Harrison held up his hand. "Before anyone asks, yes, the district attorney's office was planning to arrest Mr. Silva on false conspiracy charges. Detective James Carson specifically has been building a case designed to send an innocent man back to prison rather than admit his initial investigation was flawed. That ends now. My legal team has provided everything to the federal prosecutors. The only people going to prison are the ones who actually committed crimes." Ricardo watched the journalists scribbling frantically, cameras flashing, and felt something shift inside him. For 6 years, he'd been invisible, a number in an orange jumpsuit, a statistic in a broken system. Now, his face was on national news as a hero. The irony was almost too much to process. But the real chaos was happening behind the scenes. Robert Crane's phone had been ringing non-stop since the cartel received their package. His security system showed men with cartel tattoos circling his property. His lawyer had called to say she was dropping him as a client. His wife had seen the news and was packing to leave. And now, watching the press conference on his phone, he realized his carefully constructed life was disintegrating in real time. He tried calling Walsh and Park, but both went straight to voicemail. Cowards, abandoning him the moment things got difficult. His hands shook as he poured his 4th whiskey of the morning, watching his world burn on live television. The knock on his door made him jump. Through the window, he saw Detective Carson standing there, but not alone. Behind him were federal agents in FBI windbreakers. Carson's face was a mask of barely controlled rage. Crane opened the door, trying to maintain some dignity. "Detective, Robert Crane, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, wire fraud, embezzlement, and about 40 other charges that are going to send you away forever." Carson's voice was ice. "You have the right to remain silent, and I strongly suggest you use it." As they cuffed him, Crane saw something in Carson's eyes that made his blood freeze. The detective wasn't just angry about the crimes, he was furious about being used. Crane and his team had played Carson's prejudices like a violin, counting on his bias against ex-cons to help frame Ricardo. Now Carson realized he'd been a puppet, and that humiliation was written across his face. "I want a lawyer," Crane managed. "Good luck finding one who'll touch you." Carson's smile was vicious. "You're not just facing federal charges. Word is the Santos cartel put a $5 million bounty on Bobby Cross. You think prison's going to be safe for a rat who sent 12 of their brothers away? You just became the most wanted man in the American prison system." Crane's knees nearly buckled. He was going back to prison, where his real identity was now public knowledge, where the cartel had unlimited reach. It wasn't a sentence, it was a death warrant. Jennifer Walsh was arrested at the airport, trying to flee to the Cayman Islands with $3 million in cash. David Park barricaded himself in his apartment, leading to a 6-hour standoff that ended with him in handcuffs, screaming about how it was supposed to be foolproof. Davis and Thompson were found 3 states away, arrested at a truck stop. Their lawyer immediately offered a plea deal. They'd testify against everyone in exchange for witness protection. The rats were turning on each other, just like Ricardo had predicted they would. By evening, The full scope of the conspiracy was national news. Harrison Global's stock initially plummeted, then surged when investors realized the cancer had been cut out. Dr. Harrison's reputation went from questioned to heroic. And Ricardo Silva became the face of redemption, the ex-con who saved a billionaire and exposed corruption at every level. But the moment that broke Ricardo happened in a hospital room. Angela had been moved to protective custody after the threats, guarded by federal agents Dr. Harrison had personally arranged. When Ricardo finally saw her, she was sitting up in bed, watching the news coverage with tears streaming down her face. "You saved him," she whispered, pulling Ricardo into a fierce hug. "You saved that man's life and then took down the people who tried to kill him. 6 years they stole from you, and you still chose to do the right thing." Ricardo felt something crack open inside his chest. 6 years of suppressed emotion, of forced hardness, of survival instincts that required him to never show weakness. He buried his face in his sister's shoulder and wept like he hadn't since the day of his sentencing. "I was so tired of being powerless," he managed through the tears. "So tired of people deciding who I was based on where I'd been. I couldn't let another innocent person suffer if I had the power to stop it." Angela held him tighter. "You're not powerless anymore. You never were. They just made you believe it." That evening, back at Dr. Harrison's temporary residence, a secured penthouse with military-grade security, Sarah pulled up her final discovery. Her expression was troubled as Dr. Harrison and Ricardo joined her at the computer. "There's something that doesn't add up," she said slowly. "I've been tracking the money trail from Crane's offshore accounts. 43 million is what they stole, yes. But there's another account I can't trace, one that received regular payments from all three of them. 50,000 a month for 2 years. 1,200,000 total, paid to someone whose identity is completely scrubbed from every database I can access." Dr. Harrison leaned forward, his expression sharpening. "A fourth partner. Or the person who orchestrated everything." Sarah pulled up payment dates. "Look at this. The payment started exactly 2 weeks after you promoted Crane to CFO. Whoever this is, they've been planning this from the moment Crane had access to your company's finances." Ricardo felt the hair on his neck stand up. "They're still out there. And they just watched their entire operation collapse." Dr. Harrison's voice was grim. "Which means they're either running scared or planning something desperate." His phone buzzed. Unknown number. Everyone in the room tensed as he answered on speaker. "Congratulations, Michael." The voice was electronically distorted, but dripping with venom. "You won this round. Your little ex-con guard dog sniffed out my pawns, and you cut off a few heads of the Hydra. Very impressive. Who is this? Someone you should have paid more attention to years ago. But don't worry, we'll have plenty of time to catch up. This game is far from over." The line went dead. Sarah was already tracing the call, but her expression said she wouldn't find anything. Whoever this was had resources that matched or exceeded their own. Dr. Harrison looked at Ricardo, and something passed between them, recognition that this victory, as sweet as it was only the beginning. They'd won a battle but exposed themselves to an enemy they couldn't yet see. Yet somehow, Ricardo felt no fear. For 6 years, he'd been a victim of corrupt cops, a broken system, a society that saw his past as his entire identity. But standing here, having saved a life, exposed a conspiracy, and protected his sister, he felt something he hadn't experienced since before prison: purpose. "Let them come," he said quietly, his voice carrying a certainty that made even Sarah look at him with respect. "I survived 6 years in hell. Whatever comes next doesn't scare me. Not anymore." 6 months later, Ricardo stood in an office he never imagined would be his. Director of Security Operations at Harrison Global Industries. The title still felt surreal, printed on business cards and a nameplate that sat on a desk overlooking the city. The same city that had chewed him up and spit him out 8 months ago, treating him like human garbage for having a criminal record he didn't deserve. Staring out windows like a philosopher now? Dr. Harrison's voice carried a warmth that had become familiar over the months. "That's what happens when you give an ex-con a corner office." Ricardo turned, unable to suppress a smile. "Still getting used to it. Last year I was sleeping on my sister's couch, getting rejected from dishwasher jobs. Now I'm running security for a billion-dollar company. Running it better than anyone I've ever hired." Dr. Harrison handed him a tablet showing the quarterly security report. 0 breaches, 3 attempted infiltrations stopped before they started, and you've identified and removed 4 more potential threats we didn't even know existed. You see patterns others miss. Prison teaches you to read people. Ricardo's voice carried the weight of hard-earned wisdom. When your life depends on knowing who's a threat before they strike, you develop instincts most people never need. The truth was more complex than that simple explanation. Ricardo had revolutionized Harrison Global Security by applying lessons from the darkest corners of human nature. He understood how criminals thought because he'd been forced to live among them. He knew their codes, their tactics, their weaknesses. What society had meant as punishment had accidentally forged him into something uniquely valuable. Angela had finished nursing school. Dr. Harrison had quietly paid off her remaining tuition as a bonus. She now worked at the best hospital in the city, no longer afraid to walk to her car at night thanks to the security Ricardo had personally arranged. Their relationship had healed in ways neither thought possible after the strain of his incarceration. "There's something you should see," Dr. Harrison said, pulling up a news article on the tablet. Ricardo read the headline, "Former Executive Robert Crane Found Dead in Prison." The article detailed how Crane had lasted only 3 months behind bars before someone with cartel connections had gotten to him. The method had been brutal, meant to send a message to anyone else who thought about betraying the Santos cartel. "Good riddance," Dr. Harrison muttered, but Ricardo noticed something else in the article, a smaller paragraph about Jennifer Walsh's sentencing. 30 years, no possibility of parole. David Park had gotten 25 years after his plea deal fell apart when prosecutors found evidence he'd lied about his level of involvement. Detective Carson had been quietly reassigned after an internal investigation revealed his bias had nearly sent an innocent man to prison. He'd avoided criminal charges, but his career was effectively over, his reputation destroyed by the very prejudice he'd wielded like a weapon. Davis and Thompson were in witness protection, living under assumed names in constant fear that the people they'd betrayed would eventually find them. Their freedom was a prison of a different kind, always looking over their shoulders, never able to trust anyone, trapped in lives smaller and more suffocating than any cell. The mysterious fourth partner? Ricardo asked, knowing Dr. Harrison would understand. Sarah's still hunting. Whoever they are, they went completely dark after the press conference. Either they're planning something long-term or they cut their losses. Dr. Harrison's expression hardened. But we're ready now. That's the difference you made. We're not victims anymore. We're prepared. A knock on the door interrupted them. Sarah Chen entered, dressed in business attire. She'd officially joined Harrison Global as Chief Information Security Officer, bringing her FBI expertise to protect against digital threats. "Thought you'd want to know," she said, unable to hide her smile. "The reintegration program just received its largest donation in history. Anonymous, but we traced it to one of your shell companies, Michael." Dr. Harrison shrugged, not bothering to deny it. "The program gave me Ricardo. Figured I owed them for that." "It's more than that," Sarah continued. "The publicity from Ricardo's story has tripled applications to the program. Companies are actually competing to hire ex-cons now, seeing them as untapped talent with unique perspectives. You've started a movement." Ricardo felt his throat tighten. Dozens of people like him, written off by society, deemed irredeemable by a system that never gave them fair chances, were now getting opportunities they'd been denied. The injustice that had stolen 6 years of his life was being transformed into doors opening for others. "There's someone here to see you," Sarah added, stepping aside. Marcus walked in, the older man who'd taught Ricardo to survive his first weeks in Riverside State Penitentiary. He looked different in civilian clothes, but his eyes still carried that sharp awareness that came from decades of reading threats. "Marcus." Ricardo crossed the room, clasping the older man's hand. "You got out 3 weeks ago. Finished my sentence." Marcus looked around the office with something like pride. "Heard about what you did, saved some rich guy's life, took down a whole conspiracy. Kid, when I told you to survive, I didn't mean you had to become a legend. I just did what was right. That's what makes it legendary." Marcus pulled out a job application. "Heard you're hiring security consultants. Figured after 30 years inside, I know a thing or two about spotting threats." Ricardo took the application, but they both knew he didn't need to read it. "When can you start?" The smile that crossed Marcus's weathered face was worth more than any salary. That evening, Ricardo stood on Angela's apartment balcony, watching the sunset paint the city in gold and crimson. She joined him, handing him a beer, and for a moment they just existed in comfortable silence. "You ever think about what would have happened if you'd let him die?" Angela asked softly. "If you just walked away, kept your head down, protected yourself?" Ricardo had thought about it. In the darkest hours, he'd wondered if saving Dr. Harrison had been worth the target it painted on his back, the danger it brought to Angela, the risk of returning to prison. "Every day," he admitted. "But then I remember what 6 years in prison taught me, that the worst cage isn't made of bars. It's made of fear. Fear of standing up, of being noticed, of doing what's right when it costs you something. And now I'm free in ways I never was before prison. I know who I am. I know what I'm capable of. And I know that society's judgment doesn't define me, my actions do." He turned to face his sister. "They tried to break me. The corrupt cops, the prejudiced detective, the criminals who threatened you. They all thought I was just another ex-con to be intimidated or ignored. But they made a mistake." "What mistake?" "They assumed prison made me weak. They didn't realize it made me stronger than they could imagine." Angela hugged him tightly. "I'm proud of you. Not for becoming successful or taking down bad guys. I'm proud because you had every reason to become bitter and angry, and instead you chose to be better." 2 weeks later, Ricardo gave a speech at a reintegration program graduation. 40 men and women who'd served their time sat before him, eyes carrying that mixture of hope and fear he remembered so well, the terror that society would never accept them, that their pasts would forever define their futures. "I'm not going to tell you it's easy," Ricardo began, his voice carrying across the room. "People will see your record before they see you. They'll cross the street when you walk by. They'll reject your applications without reading them. Some days, you'll wonder if you should have just stayed in prison where at least you knew what to expect." He paused, letting that harsh reality sink in. "But here's what I learned. The world sees what it expects to see. If you act like a victim, they'll treat you like one. If you accept their judgment, they'll never question it. But if you show them who you really are, if you prove through your actions that you're more than your worst mistake, some of them will see it. And those people, the ones willing to look past your record to your character, they're worth finding." A young woman in the front row raised her hand. "But what if no one gives us that chance?" "Then you create it." Ricardo pulled up his phone, showing them a picture of Dr. Harrison's press conference. 6 months ago, I was sleeping on my sister's couch, couldn't get a job anywhere. Today, I run security for one of the biggest companies in the country. Not because someone felt sorry for me, but because I proved I was valuable. Because when it mattered, I chose to do the right thing even when it cost me everything. He looked at each of them, willing them to understand. "Your record is part of your story, but it doesn't have to be the ending. I spent 6 years in Riverside for a crime I didn't commit. I could have let that destroy me. Instead, I let it teach me. And when the moment came to use those lessons, to recognize danger others couldn't see, to act when easier to run, I was ready." Marcus stood at the back of the room, nodding with approval. Sarah and Dr. Harrison watched from the side, witnesses to the transformation of a man who'd been written off by everyone. "The best revenge against a system that tried to break you isn't destruction," Ricardo concluded, his voice rising with conviction. "It's success. It's proving that their judgment was wrong. It's becoming so valuable, so necessary, so exceptional that they can't ignore you anymore. They tried to cage me. Instead, they forged me into something stronger than they'll ever understand." The applause was thunderous, but Ricardo barely heard it. He was thinking about that moment in the parking garage, when he'd had to choose between his job and a man's life. How that single decision had cascaded into everything that followed. The conspiracy exposed, the criminals imprisoned, his own redemption validated. 3 months after that, Dr. Harrison called Ricardo into his office with news that made his hand shake. The mysterious fourth partner had been found, not by Sarah's digital hunting, but by pure chance. A low-level accountant had come forward with evidence that the mastermind was Dr. Harrison's own cousin, someone who'd felt entitled to the company fortune and had orchestrated everything from the shadows. The arrest made headlines, the conspiracy complete. But Ricardo felt no satisfaction in it, only exhausted relief. They'd won not through revenge, but through integrity. Through refusing to compromise their principles even when it would have been easier. That night, Ricardo returned to his apartment, no longer Angela's couch, but a modest place he'd earned himself. On his desk sat the acceptance letter from the university. They'd offered him a full scholarship to study criminology, wanting his unique perspective on criminal psychology and rehabilitation. He thought about accepting. About using his hard-earned wisdom to change the system that had failed him. About becoming something more than a security director, becoming an advocate, a voice for the voiceless, a proof that redemption was possible. But first, he just sat in the quiet of his home, a place that was truly his, and let himself feel the weight lift. The weight of being judged, of being less than, of carrying the burden of others' prejudices. Ricardo Silva had been convicted at 28, imprisoned for 6 years for someone else's crime, released into a world that saw him as human trash. At 34, he'd saved a life, exposed a conspiracy, and rebuilt himself into someone even his enemies had to respect. The best revenge isn't destroying those who wronged you. It's becoming so successful they can't deny your worth. It's proving that their judgment says more about them than it ever did about you. It's rising so high that the pit they tried to bury you in becomes invisible far below. They'd tried to break him. Instead, they'd made him unbreakable. If this story moved you, subscribe to the channel for more true tales of justice, redemption, and the power of choosing integrity even when the world gives you every reason not to. Because sometimes, the strongest people aren't those who never fell, they're the ones who got back up and proved everyone wrong.